Okay, so I was working with Jolt on refactoring some of the Canvas Starter app API code, and so I thought may as well share that with everybody as we go. So a couple of things that are probably important to understand is one, the Canvas RB file contains the code that talks to the Canvas API, and it is not 100% complete. So there are times when you might have to add new functionality when you are writing this code so that you can talk to whatever API endpoints that you need. The other thing, we took a look at this make API request method and decided that it was fundamentally broken, so we've been fixing it. So I wanted to kind of walk through the process that we're using to fix that so that everybody can see. So one of the first things that we did was we pulled out this get next URL. So you can see there's some kind of ugly logic in here for actually finding the URL and then cleaning it up and whatnot. So that was embedded in this method, but now we want to have a make paged API and a page request. We want two different methods for dealing with dealing with paging when we talk to the Canvas API. So it became important that we extract out this get next URL method, so that logic only lives in one place. So first thing we did is created this set of specs before we wrote any code. So this get next URL is going to receive some string that looks like this. Now that string is going to come from a header value that's returned in the response from the Canvas API, which we take care of, but this specific method does not need to worry about the headers or anything. It just gets passed a string, and if it's passed a string, then it should return the URL with rel equals next. You'll also notice that it puts these in brackets, and so it's important that we get rid of those, otherwise we wouldn't be able to make the next API request. All right, so after you do that, we can come in here and run our specs. This will actually run all of them. Typically you just want to run one of them. You can see one of them is failing, but we'll get to that one here in just a second. But the get next URL, all three tests pass. So now we know that we can trust that specific method. Okay, so now the next thing that we wanted to do is create these two methods, basically clean these up. So starting with the make paged API requests, we're going to start writing some specs, and we've got the debugger in here. All of the requests are actually mocked, so none of these hit the actual Canvas API. That's important because you want to be able to run your tests offline. You don't want to be hitting live URL endpoints because you could mess up live data. So instead, we use webmock with a great deal of success, actually. You can see that for any time we get a request for something, example.com API v1 courses, so we're using example.com for the URL. It doesn't really matter since it's not making an actual request. Anytime we make one of these requests to courses, it's going to return a status of 200 with this body, Canvas courses, which is this code up here, which is some stuff that we included, or that we got by looking at what the Canvas API was returning. So it's just a big ugly JSON looking string. All right, so now we want to pass in these headers. So this is the link header that we're going to use to figure out what the next thing that should be called is. Okay, so, and we're going to need to tweak this just a little bit because we have the potential to run into an infinite loop, so I want to deal with that too. Okay, so these, instead of example.instructure.com, that's not going to work in our case. It just has to be example.com. So in fact, we could call it, foo.example.com because the regex will match that. Now this is going to make a request to the API, v1 courses, discussion topics, etc. I'm going to get rid of this piece, actually this whole piece right here, so that we make a new request for courses. All right. So now that will return a specific set of headers that will send our application into an infinite loop, assuming it even reads the headers correctly. So one other thing I want to do here real quick is I'm going to create another request here. And I'm going to say, if anything matches, let's see, I'm going to change this from foo to next courses. Okay. So now on the second request, we're going to hit this guy instead and just return these things and be done, because we don't want to keep making requests after that. We just want to do it the one time. Okay, so I think that should work. Let's go try it. If I can find the right screen. There it is. Okay. So now when I run the specs, let's see if everything rolls up in our face. All right, so we still have one failure, which is this undefined variable method next page inside of page request. So let's go look at that. Okay, so that tells me we never finished refactoring this stuff. So next page actually should be next URL. And we don't want it doing this ugly stuff. We want it doing this thing right here. So get rid of that code. And we're going to get rid of the page counter. All right, so in this particular piece of code, what we're doing is messing up. That's not supposed to be page requests. There we go. All right, so this says go call the Canvas API, ask for however many results, and then as long as we keep getting next URLs, in other words, Canvas says, hey, there's still more data, we're going to keep making calls to get that data, and we're going to yield that up to the guy who calls page requests. So I think I started writing this code, but never finished. Okay, so one of the things that we want to check is that it does actually get called twice. So times called equals 0. All right, so that's one of the things that we can check for, so that once the test gets expect times called to equal to. Let's go run that test. This just verifies that the test that we were just writing actually works. So clearly it does not. And I was pretty sure that was how to do it, but it's not functioning. Okay, give me just a sec. I got to figure out some syntax here. Okay, so I think what the problem is here is that we don't actually need to pass a block. We just need to yield the result to the calling code. So if we do that, it'll work. So now this should take the results, yield it up to the guy who calls it. In this case, it's going to be right here in our test. So if we run this, I think we get into an infinite loop. Yeah, so page requests goes on forever, so let's figure out why that is the case. We can drop a debugger right here. And that should let us take a look at the result. Format. Okay, so so webmock is not doing the right thing. So we keep getting the same error over and over again. Okay, so let's quit there. Dropping into here. And try this again. Okay, so result is probably going to be that same error, but I'm curious why this doesn't yield a nil. So it is still finding that URL on every loop. So if I do it again, it's finding it again. I get this undefined method format for HTTP. Okay, let's see if we can figure out what that is. Alright, so maybe we just need a newer version of HTTP party. So it looks like this was an error. Okay, so let's check and see what version we're using. .4. It's like that's the version everybody else had problems with, but it's been fixed back in May. All right, so we probably want to upgrade to 13.5. So let's do that and give it that version. Let's see, 0.13.5, right? Okay. Install that. Try this again. Okay, so now we have an actual result. So that's good. So now we can see what this is, and you can see there's this biology thing, etc. Now if I hit continue, result is still that biology thing, and result dot headers. This is how the links come back from Canvas. So it keeps sending those. So we're matching the wrong thing in our tests. So okay, so we've got that fixed. Going into our webmock, I've stubbed it out to return this next courses. So my hope is that the first time through we would return this stuff, return these URLs, which would then match this guy. So let's, the order of these might be affecting it too. But instead, I'm just going to, because this matches example, let's match it to something else. So next courses dot, just make it example1.com, which is probably a domain somebody owns. Let's try that and see if we can get it to not return the headers the second time through. In which case, it'll break that infinite loop and we won't have much problem. So here, let's just check the next URL. And we have it, so we hit continue, and if we do it again, it's still matching. That's great. Okay. Oh, because we did this. Let's change this to a potentially real domain, but we've mocked it out, so it won't actually call it. So we're just going to do this. And try it again. All right, so there's the first run through, and we get our next. Okay, we get that. So go through the second time. It's still matching. Okay, so for some reason we continue to get these headers over and over again. Question is why. Oh, look at that. That's why. Because in our standard headers, we've embedded that link in there. Okay, so we're going to rip that out because that will send a lot of different methods into it, potentially send them into an infinite request. I'm going to bring this down here just in case we need those headers again. Let's run this test. Okay. And we're still getting them. Okay, give me a second to figure this one out. So I think what we found here is that we're too liberal in our matching, and the star right here is what's causing this grief. So our regex is matching this guy over and over, and that's not what we want. So now if we go and we run this, here's the first time through, and we can see we get the result back as we would expect it from the Canvas API. And here's the next links. If we hit continue, then the result is more courses. I mean, it's the same thing over and over again, but we don't care because it's just mock data. But this time, what we were hoping to happen does happen, and the next URL, if I just grab this little bit of code, you'll notice it comes back as nil. So we need to go fix that because it looks like there's a different error inside of get next URL. Actually, let me take a look at something. Ah, that's nil. Okay, so that's a test case that we did not take into account. So let's go write another spec for the get next URL, and it's going to break. So pause on this one. We're going to add one more spec up here, which is it handles nil values. Okay. So if it's given a nil value, it shouldn't crash. It's going to, but we'll fix that after we run the specs to prove that it does crash. We need to get rid of that guy. Okay, so up here you can see get next URL handles nil values, it failed. So let's go fix it. And I'm getting rid of these debuggers while we're at it, just so we don't stop on our tests all the time. So right here, we're just going to return if, I guess we're in Rails, so we can do link.blank. If you weren't in Rails, then there's no .blank. You could test for .nil. You could also just, there's a couple of tests you could run, but that's really convenient to just say link.blank. Or if you want to check if it's present, you can do link.present. So this just going to return it. So now if we go run our tests again, okay, so now we're back to having one failure, and our get next URL is passing. Okay, so something about the page requests dies. So undefined method EA. Looks like maybe we have a typo or something. Canvas spec line 87. We'll look at line 87. Oh, 2 equal 2. It is a typo. So now we can run that again and prove that that only gets called twice. So we're not in an infinite loop. It's doing exactly what we expect. So that's nice. All right, so the other thing we can do is right here, we can say expect result to equal something. Now, the way that we check this, I think we've already checked it down here. Let's see, we get courses right here. Maybe we haven't done anything with the results. Okay. So we could check that result for specific values and test it against what we would expect. So maybe that's what we should do here. Okay. So let's go see what result is. It's going to be that string that we returned, but it's going to be wrapped up in HTTP party, which looks like it does parse it. I think you can iterate over these guys, so you can ask for first, and we could do a simple test like result first dot course code, or course code here, and we expect that to be biology. So we could just run a couple of really simple tests, and since each iteration through this guy is going to call the same one, then this will just work. So we can say expect that guy to equal biology. And that will give us some reassurance that we're getting an actual response back. We can parse that response, and that response looks like we expect it to look like. Now let's go run the test again. Out the debugger. That'll just run the one. That's fine. Okay, and that passed. So let's run all of the tests in this file, and they should all pass. So while that's running, one of the things looks like we're all green, so we're good. One of the benefits to this approach is I haven't actually hit the Canvas API at all. So as I write new methods and add new specs for those methods, I can easily discover what it is that the live API is going to return, and then write some code against that without hitting the actual live API. In this case, I was kind of lucky because you can see I've already went out and figured out what these different method calls return and what I would expect, and then I've stubbed those out. If you're ever in a situation where you're calling a new API and you don't have any of the mocked data, then a lot of times what I'll do is I'll go to the code that would call it, or I would go to a console and make a call to that API and then see what the string is. And then I just copy and paste the string over. So that's about the best way that I can think of. There's another tool called VCR. We haven't used it in a long time because it was actually kind of painful to get it set up. So nowadays we'll just copy and paste the strings and then say, for this given request, you should return this specific data in the body. And that data is just going to be a string. We do have the headers available, at least for Canvas. So whenever you're talking to Canvas, here's the headers that are going to come back. Something like that. We could be more sophisticated in how we generate the headers, but this works for the kind of tests that we need to do. Okay, so having done all that, still need to write the make paged API request. So maybe let's write that. Let's just do it really quickly. So this guy should return all results from the API call. So the whole point of a make paged API request is that Canvas will only return, by default, only return 10 records at a time. You can ask for up to 100. Every once in a while, you want everything, and you're willing to wait for that. So that's what this guy does. He just keeps calling until Canvas says, hey, there's no more data. So now let's write that code. So it's going to look similar to this guy, except there's no yield. So come over into here, and I can say make paged API request. Drop that into here. It's going to call the same URL. But in this case, we're just going to get one set of results back. Now what we expect is that those results will be 2 full sets of results. So the result length should equal something, and I'm not sure, I can't remember how many results there are. So let's go look in the data. It might be easier just to run this once and then count them. So let's do that. All right, so results.length is 16. So I'm guessing if we had made this request, in fact, we can actually do this. If I make this request without doing the page version, which I think is get API request. No, it's not. It's API get request. Okay, get request. I'm going to guess that this will return 8 results, which it does. So basically it's doing exactly what we expect. We get one set of results, there's 8 of them. We get the next set, there's another 8. So I would expect that in my test, we are going to get back 16 results. Oops, 16. Okay. And that's probably good enough for the kind of tests we want to do here. We could do this, I guess, where we say we expect the first one of those guys to be biology. Interestingly, we would also expect the 9th one of those guys to also be biology. So you could potentially do that. So we could say, zero-based index, so should be the 8th guy. Let's run this test. Ooh, one of them failed. Undefined local method, local variable results, spec line 80. Oh, results. All right, now we're all green again. We have tests. We know that this will work against the API, and we know that if we decide to refactor these guys, so maybe maybe we don't like this, for example. So we want to refactor that into something else. We can do that and run the tests and still be confident that our code didn't break something. All right, so I think that that's kind of it. Just kind of wanted to run through a little bit of the Canvas starter app, the Canvas API, how to add new methods to it, how to test those methods, and just make everybody aware that not everything that you need is in Canvas or in the Canvas RB. There's a lot of stuff for most of the general methods you're going to call, but every once in a while you're going to be like, oh, there's this other Canvas method that we need to call. It's super easy to add it, and if it's a method that's going to require paging, we now have a couple of methods that can handle that right here. So there you are. How about it? Any questions?
No, not really.
Okay.
Yeah, this looks great.
Okay. Thank you much.
Thank you.
Talk to you guys later.